Okay.
I mean, Rush formed in the early '70s, and there was, there was a lot of downtime that you could have pursued a solo album, and you never did. You were
Right.
comfortable. But what really pushed you to do it? Was it you had a bit more time off?
Me,
What pushed you? More confidence in yourself as a writer?
well, I never really had much interest in doing anything of a solo nature. I like working in the context of a band, and to me, the whole fun of what I do is the collaboration, the collaborative side of things. So, working with Alex and Neil is, as a writer, is very interesting, and so I didn't harbor any great frustrations or anything. But when this when this hiatus from Rush happened, and it was apparent that it was going to be a long one, I started thinking about ways of expressing myself that were going to be comfortable for me. And one of the unfulfilled desires I had had all these years was working with my friend Ben Mink, who
You've
I
known
have
for a long time.
yeah, I've known him for a long time, and I have great respect for him, and we are very good friends. So this was started as kind of a joke, as kind of a threat, as kind of an excuse for him and I to hang around together and see if there's any musical possibility there. So it became it started very shyly and very quietly with a series of sporadic writing sessions that honestly we really believed would lead to the two of us starting a production company and produce other artists and things like that.
Could that still happen?
Yeah, totally, that could
cool.
still happen. So I think the last thing on the agenda was doing a record. And the last thing for me was doing a record that would be represented by myself as a solo artist. And that just came as a result of loving the material, feeling quite possessive about the material and not wanting other people to cover it at that stage for fear of it changing too much. And support from the record company and encouragement from them to go ahead and do this.
I mean, when you've been in a group situation so long, you have the support of others, and not all the responsibilities on you. But this time, even though obviously you spread the responsibility out with Ben, as well as the other co-producer on the record.
Yeah, David Leonard.
David. But as an artist, all the responsibility was on you. Was that a bit overwhelming, and how did you deal with that?
Well, it wasn't musically overwhelming, and it wasn't overwhelming in terms of, getting the job done on a daily basis. I've always taken a very responsible role in the course of Rush, of getting things done and making sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and so I don't mind to take that responsibility, and extra responsibility doesn't scare me at all. Matter of fact, I welcome it because then at least I know it's getting done. But
Are you a workaholic?
I'm not a workaholic, but once I get involved in a project, I take it very seriously, and I throw myself right into it. Now, I've learned over the years that has to be tempered by the rest of my life because I'm not prepared to sacrifice the quality of my life to do any piece of work. And so what I did...
Was your thinking always like that, when you were a lot younger? Were you pretty much career?
No.
Was everything you were always that way? Really?
No, I was very ambitious when I was younger, and I've only learned this through mistakes of life. So, and it's only from your failures that you really learn a lot. Success gives you confidence. Failure gives you knowledge of what not to do again. So
sometimes you learn more from failure too.
Very often.
Yeah.
I think that's the rule. But the only things that got difficult for me was working to the deadline that we had, and towards the end of it, realizing that, no one is going to push this project to the final, completion other than myself. And then that got a bit tiring. That started to feel like okay, there's nobody else in this room that's going to make it get done unless I keep pushing it. So.
Would you play works in progress for some people just so you could get a feel? Maybe some people outside of it, maybe your family and things like that, or were you keeping it pretty close to your chest?
Yeah, I don't believe in playing music for other people. Very, very few people heard this music until it was finished.
Really?
And I've always been like that with Rush music too.
Even the record company?
I don't play anything for the record company. The only thing I played some music for was Val Azzoli, who is one of my closest friends, and I knew that his advice would be non-biased and objective. And that was only at a point where I wasn't sure whether I should go ahead and do my own record or whether I should go ahead and pursue, a production company direction.
Oh, okay.
So I played him a few tunes early on for him to give me a vibe on.
What was his impression?
Well, he was emphatic that I should do my own record.
Oh, really?
So, and that was the first thing that started getting me seriously thinking about that.
Yeah. I mean, I've known Ben's work through. I'm a big fan of his work with Geddy Lang. I think he's just a fantastic songwriter and an amazing musician who can just bring a lot of different colors. So I was interested to see what the merging would be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because I can't really tell a stamp. I can't really hear his stamp on the record. I hear it, kind of as a unified. I hear it is even more accessible than sometimes some of Rush's stuff as well, which is a compliment, actually.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Ben is not an initiator of music in a sense. He's grown up as a collaborator, and he's worked with so many great artists that he has always existed in the world of the overdub. This is a joke that we always make between the two of us. He's been an overdub his whole life. And, when you're a bass player, you're part of the rhythm section, and you've got to be part of what gets the whole thing going. So I think with a lot of the music we wrote together, some of the insistence and the beginning of the thing would come from something I wanted to accomplish, and then he would come in and help shape it with me and contribute ideas that I would never have come up with.
What songs really took, songs take shape in the studio, and sometimes they're fairly close to what you think they're going to be, and then sometimes they turn out to be a totally different animal. And what would you say was the song on the record that, from conception to recording and the finished product, really turned out to be something completely left field, or at least quite a bit different to what you expected, and maybe a good happy accident?
Well, hard
Or
to
there not?
say.
Maybe there were not.
Hard to say. I mean, Window to the World, we put a lot of work into, and we did that song 3 different ways. We did 3 completely different versions of that song before we knew exactly how we wanted it to feel. I think Headache, in a way, began as kind of a experiment with me just screwing around with my bass and trying to play some very, very aggressive bass things, and it became kind of the joke song. Whenever I needed to throw something outrageous in a song, I put it in that song. And it was probably the last song really to come together, and I think it's probably the most surprising. Now that it began as a kind of atonal bass monster song, and I'm surprised that it ended up so musical and so interesting in the way that it came together. And so that's a surprise.
Well, that brings up, I was going to ask you about this later, but we have a bass player show that obviously we want to spotlight you and actually have you talk about your bass playing and maybe pick a bass player that we could play a song by. But talk about your approach. Your approach to bass playing is pretty unique. It's not, it's melodic, but it's also, there's quite a bit of technical virtuosity as well. You have both abilities. Talk a bit about your approach and what you believe the bass should do for a song. Can you pretty much tell what a part's going to be, or is there a lot of experimentation? Those are a couple questions I should ask you.
Yeah.
First, your approach. as a bass player with Rush and as a solo artist?
Well, I think my approach tries to be a little flexible depending on what the song demands. But, I look to put melody in the bass lines and I look to put thrust. For me, it's important to be the tie between the drums and the guitar that help propels the song. I think if the bass is lying there, it doesn't matter how great the drum track is, it's going to weigh the song down in the wrong way. So for me, and my style developed, out of a need to keep a three-piece situation interesting. So it's not simply a bottom-end provider. It's also an element that adds melody and interest when their other guitar is busy doing something else. So I'm a noisy bastard, I try to be noisy and melodic and somehow keep a whole other set of interests going on in the song that may or may not relate to the vocal melody.
If you had to pick one bass player that we could play a song by on the show and maybe talk about his or her style, who would you choose that was really, really important or still is important to you in terms of learning your craft?
Well, probably the most important early influence would have been Jack Bruce and the Cream. And if you listen to his playing, he really set me up for what I wanted to do. He was a three-piece bass player, vocalist. He had a noisy sound. He was very melodic, very capable, and he sang beautifully, really passionate vocalist. And I enjoyed his solo albums immensely after he left Cream. And, those records have kind of languished in obscurity, but I think they're terrific musical statements. So he had a profound effect on me, I think.
That's interesting. I would have picked. I was going to pick him or Chris Squire. I was going to think you were going to pick one of those.
Well, Chris Squire tonally, I think, and certainly the ambitious attitude that Chris Squire has suited me and suited the style of music I was doing, and I liked his sound a lot. I mean, his sound probably was the most, of all bass players, if I had to pick a sound that I wanted to emulate, him and John Entwistle were the two sounds that definitely affected me a lot. But in terms of a player and a performer and the kind of bass player I wanted to be, I'd say Jack Bruce was more influential.
Yeah, that's true. And as a singer, obviously,
Yeah.
he was a great singer. I just saw him play with Ringo's band.
Oh yeah,
He's still pretty damn good.
he's
Weird looking
no
bass though he plays. Strange bass. It's like it's small. It's small. It's like a Hofner. It's fairly small.
Mm-hmm.
I bet it doesn't weigh. I bet it weighs a ton actually. But I couldn't figure out what type of bass it was actually.
Really, I haven't seen him in years, so I don't know what he's playing right now.
Have you ever heard that? Have you ever heard from any of these people? Have you ever run into anyone like? Have you ever run into Jack Bruce or
No,
Squire?
never met either of them.
Really?
Yeah.
Weird. Through the years, that's
Yeah.
funny. When you get the urge just to play an instrument, I'm curious, because you can play piano, I'm sure. I know you, obviously bass and guitar, maybe even some other things. But what's the instrument that you go for?
When I'm writing, you mean, or just relaxing?
Just relaxing.
Well, I like to play bass. I like
Do
to
you
play
really?
a little bit of guitar. I'm not a good guitarist, and I'm not a good keyboard player. So those things are fun to dabble with, but they're ultimately unrewarding because I have limitations as a player. So I can't really express myself properly on either of those two instruments, where I'm much more comfortable on bass.
Yeah. Do you still try to work at becoming even a better player, or is it you pretty much?
I'm really lazy.
Are you?
I'm really lazy. I don't practice nearly as much as I should.
Did you used to, when you first started out, what was your practice regime? Were you real serious about practicing, or it just came pretty naturally?
It came pretty naturally, and I've always been lazy. If I had not been so lazy, I think I would have been a much better bass player, technically.
Do you regret that, or?
Yeah, I do sometimes, yeah.
Well, I think when people listen to your bass playing, I don't think they hear a lazy player. They hear a pretty damn
Well,
good player.
well, it's because I developed a style, that excuses my laziness.
That's
But essentially, I think that I could have been a much more technically proficient player, but maybe I would have paid for it in my style.
yeah. A lot of people, when they write, I know there's some people I've spoken to, they say if they're writing something and it's not something that they think is great, they just stop. And then there's other people that just will complete the song to complete it.
Right.
Which one you think best describes your approach? If you're working on something, it's not that great, will you just finish it, or you just throw it aside and say, okay, that sucks, let me come up with something else?
Well, if I'm convinced that it sucks, I'll stop.
Right.
I mean,
How about if you're in between, will you finish it?
yeah, because sometimes you don't know what's bugging you about it. For me, when something's wrong with a song, you got to really try to step back and figure out what's wrong with it. Otherwise, you could start wrecking all kinds of things about the song that are fine. The whole art of putting a song together, an arrangement, is really fascinating, because you listen to a song and you don't get off on it. And like, why don't I get off on it? What's wrong with this part? And that's a real talent, to try to find what's wrong with a thing. Because you could blame the vocal, or you could blame the rhythm track, and you start changing all these things when basically you just needed to rewrite the verse or something like that. So I think you have to be real careful at that stage, recognizing whether the song really works or doesn't work. And if you're having to work that hard on a song, chances are, throw it away, start again. Don't be afraid to start again, because you can always come back to it. So for me, I think that's been a big lesson, and working on this project was good from that point of view, because I had so much time. With Rush, really, things are very compressed, and even though we don't work on a deadline, we do work on a deadline. We impose our own deadlines. We say, okay, we want to have an album out by this time, and we allowed ourselves 2 months to write, and we're too industrious for our own good sometimes, and so you might be close to finishing a record, and maybe you realize, one of these songs on this record maybe is not up to snuff. But the whole momentum of the band thing just carries it through anyway, and there's no turning it around, and it's really unstoppable at a certain point, which I think is a mistake. I think sometimes if your guts tell you something wrong with one of the tunes, well, just stop the fucking train for a minute and and fix it.
Rush has always been really good about handling, at least from the public's view, handling fame fairly well. I mean, thank God there's been no ODs or things like that. But I mean, you guys have always you won't turn the TV on and see you guys showing up at these high-profile parties. I mean that I never saw that in any of the.
You haven't seen us yet.
Haven't seen it yet, but that may happen.
Well, we're young yet.
You're still young, but but if you could talk a bit about obviously there has to be somewhat of a separation between being a famous person and being successful, and Rush is still pretty darn huge. I mean, you guys can come and not even have an album out and sell out at the largest arena in Philadelphia, obviously. But if you could talk a bit about your feelings on fame and stardom, and how you've been able to, keep grounded.
Yeah, well,
because you guys do. You guys are.
Well, I think how you handle fame is directly related to how quickly fame comes to you. What you want out of it, what kind of person you are to begin with. I think the three of us have a very strong strain of normalcy, and that was probably from all of us being brought up in middle-class environments, and we all have this kind of work ethic and a sense of right and wrong, which a lot of people don't have. And being slightly timid in our natures, to live badly feels wrong, looks wrong,
Right.
seems impolite somehow. So that's part of it. I think the fact that it took us a lot of hard work and a really long time to get successful means that we appreciate what success we've had, and we're still not, a household name. It's not like we're a mainstream, pop act or something like that. And there's still lots of places in the world that people don't know us. So I think that's a big factor. I think we've always been focused on music too, and not getting successful in terms of, like, our overriding motivation is to make records that are successful on a artistic level.
Right.
So that's first, and we cross our fingers that those records sell and are popular. But we're not in there trying to make the most popular record. We're trying to make the best record we can make as musicians on that day. And so our focus is turned inside the music so much that what happens afterwards is kind of uncontrollable for us. So I think the fact that we have strong, family ties, that helps a lot too. And we, but that ties back to my first response, which is all about this kind of normal middle-class upbringing.
Now,
Right?
your style changed, or at least the tone changed a bit. I would say maybe late 70s,
Right.
early 80s, where it became lower. Talk a bit about your singing style, and was that a conscious change, or was it just the material that you were writing suited your voice to sing maybe in a lower key?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to become more interesting as a singer at a certain point, and the music we were writing was changing, and so it accommodated that. And some of that change came about because I wanted it to change, and I wanted to write and experiment in different ways and use my voice differently. I think that's just natural desire to experiment and see what you can become as a singer, as opposed to, the earlier records were high energy music and very intense vocal deliveries, and I just didn't want to keep doing that forever. So it was a conscious effort, and I think it's important to maintain an experimental side to a band at all times to keep that interesting.
Is that hard after you've been together so long? Is that hard to really, influx some new ideas that are a bit different? Might be scary too, because when you're on that course for stardom and it's there for you,
Mm-hmm.
to experiment a bit sometimes can be,
Yeah, but I think our experiments were never in the world of the abstract, because where we started was so weird in some ways, that our experiments were actually more...
Dowitts and Narpads, or my friend.
Yeah, I mean,
What's
when
that
you go
song?
from Didacts and Narpits to actually experimenting with, quote, melodies...
I think I'm going bald.
Yeah. I mean, I
What
think...
do you think when you? I mean, those songs have their own character and charm. Do you look back fondly on songs like this?
Yeah, they're funny. Yeah.
If I had to put a bass in your hand and say play Didacts and Narpads, could you do it?
No.
Could you come close?
No, I couldn't even remember it. There may not even be a bass in that song.
Yeah, or think I'm going bald, or I'm just
Yeah,
picking some
I could.
obscure song.
I could play that. Parts of it anyway. You give me a couple minutes, it would come back. But yeah, I think to answer your question, I think that our experiments are not abstract experiments. They're, song structure experiments. They're driven by a desire to understand songwriting.
Whatever happened to John Rutsey? Does anyone keep in touch with him? Where is he?
I haven't heard from him in about 8 or 9 years,
Really?
so I don't know what's going on with him.
Does he still play, or
I don't think so.
no? He stopped playing. When we spoke about a month ago, when the record first came out, you mentioned that Alex was really excited and heard the record, but Neil didn't get a copy yet. Did Neil get a copy yet?
Yeah, he's heard it, and he called me, and I had dinner with him a couple weeks ago out in the West Coast, and he had very nice things to say.
Yeah. What did he say about the lyrics? Because you've done pretty well on your own with the lyrics.
Well, I think he'd only listened to the record for a couple of days, so the first thing he commented was on my vocal performances and how great he thought my vocals sounded. We didn't really get into anything lyrically.
That's great, though. That's good. I'm glad you finally got him a copy
Yeah.
of the record as
Well,
well.
I know he would appreciate the cover art, so I didn't want to send it out to him until I had a final cover to send him. Because he is
Talk about the cover.
he's instrumental in dealing with our cover art, so I knew that was an area of interest to him. Him and I both are big fans of cover art.
One or two of your favorite Rush album covers and why?
Okay, I have to think of some of them now.
Can I tell you my?
Sure.
I like Moving Pictures a lot. Permanent Waves I like a lot.
Yeah,
Grace Under Pressure.
I like Moving Pictures. Permanent Waves, I think, I like the idea of it, but I don't like the execution of it in retrospect. I think it looks a bit like it could have been done better, but for the technology of the time, I think it was okay. I think Grace Under Pressure is just a magnificent painting, so I like that one a lot.
Okay.
Although the album picture on the back of that is probably the worst photo ever taken of us. So, if I had to do that again, boy. Just my mind's gone blank to some of the covers. Power Windows, again, I like the idea of it. I think it would have worked better as a photographic image rather than a painted image. I think something about the painted image bugs me about that.
Who came up with the Rush?
Power Windows, good cover.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a real strong cover.
Who came up with the Rush logo? Who designed that?
Which one? There's
The
about
one,
about 22 of them.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to think. I'm thinking of the early one, the early, kind of.
Like
Well,
a-
I can't draw it, but you know what I mean.
The
The
very
early,
first one?
Yeah,
I
the
don't.
first
I don't remember the guy's name. I think his name is Paul Weldon. But it was a short-lived logo
It is
in some
interesting
ways.
that the band. It's unlike a band like Kiss, who has their own logo.
Yeah, well, it was conscious. Every album,
Was it?
we changed a little bit, and we wanted the logo to change a little bit.
Hmm.
If I look back, I think Test for Echo, I think, is probably my favorite album cover of all of our album covers. And I think it's just a gorgeous piece of work and a really deep piece of work.
What did Neil think of that? The cover.
He liked it. We didn't get into a long discussion about it because he had just gotten it, but he thought it looked great.
Is the plan still next year, early next year, to get together with the other
Yeah.
guys?
Yeah, we're getting together in about 3 weeks.
You have anything written, or are you just going to
No.
wait?
No, I don't want to write anything beforehand. I haven't got time anyway.
How about a tour? Any thoughts of a solo tour yet?
Not. I'd like to. I'm researching it, but nothing I can talk about yet.
Could it happen within the time frame of what you're going to be getting together with the other guys? Or
Maybe.
Is it gonna be tight?
Maybe it's going to be tight, but maybe.
Do you miss playing live? Because you haven't played live for quite a while.
No, I don't actually.
Really? If you didn't have to play, if Rush could continue, be like a Steely Dan, although they're out touring again.
Right.
But if Rush could continue, and you guys could stop the touring, is that something you would do, or is it just kind of a necessary evil?
I don't think Rush can exist without touring.
Really?
I think Rush and touring are kind of synonymous. And I enjoy touring when I'm touring with Rush in a well-organized fashion. And I like playing live. I like writing and recording much more than I like playing live. But I don't know. I mean, I've done a lot of gigs, So if I didn't do any more gigs for the rest of my life, it wouldn't kill me. If I could never write music again for the rest of my life, it would kill me. I don't think I would be very happy.
Yeah.
So that's how I look at it. I enjoy doing gigs with Rush. I would like to go out and do gigs with the guys on this band. That would be kind of fun, and do it on a much smaller scale. But I cannot really see Rush existing as a studio band. You know, for me, so much of what we do needs to be taken into a performance thing and experimented, which is why we've done so many live albums. You know, I think so much of our success has come as a result of what we can do live, and I think the two go hand in hand.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's good that they're the long gaps so you can relax from touring a little bit.
Yeah.
You're not like in there studio tour, even though that's kind of what happens. But at least,
Yeah.
unlike the early days where you really had to just you couldn't stop.
No.
You had the grind. When did the grind stop? At least somewhat.
I don't remember now which album it was, but I remember there was a time, and maybe it was after Grace Under Pressure, I think. Definitely after Grace Under Pressure. That was a real hard record to make, and the tour was brutal, and we weren't happy puppies, and in order for us to stay together, we had to change the way we did things.
Mm.
So
Was that the closest the band came to saying, "Okay, guys, let's just"?
well, you know, it was unspoken, but it was not a happy situation.
Spirit of Radio. What can you say about that?
What can I say about Spirit of Radio?
That you haven't.
What I haven't said already. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've had to say something about Spirit of Radio. I hear it on the radio from time to time, and it's got a great energy and a great spontaneity. I think that record was recorded quickly, and it sounds like it to me, and I mean that in a good way. It was well recorded, and it has a real spark of spontaneity.
I remember when I first heard it, I loved it. And I went out and bought the single. Still have the single, and
Oh, really?
that's kind of rushed. It's not like you guys were like
We're a big singles band, man.
yeah, like the Britney. How about Limelight? I just saw that on VH1 Classic. Actually.
Limelight is a song that really ages well, I think. And the more I hear it and the more time goes by, the more I appreciate the depth of that song. So that's a powerful song. And it's from a period that I think has stood the test of time pretty well.
I like Red Barchetta. Anything you could say about that? Do you like that one?
I haven't heard that song in ages, but it's a great song. I don't, I always enjoy playing it live.
Yeah. Was that one you guys played for a while and then dropped, or was it?
Yeah, that's one of those that we kind of got sick of playing, and then we brought it back, I think, on the last tour. And I don't remember if we played it on the last tour or the previous tour, but it was it's a fun song to do live. But
Tom Sawyer, which is now being used for a commercial, right?
yeah, Tom Sawyer is another one of those songs that just wears very well. I hear it on the radio. Sometimes if I go to the basketball game, they play it at the Air Canada Centre in Toronto, and it sounds great over the big systems.
Starting with Tragically Hip.
Okay, well, Tragically Hip to me are the quintessential modern Canadian rock band. I think they're incredibly poetic. They really rock out. And they have a sound that I think has not quite come across to Americans in the way that they could. But I think they're one of those bands that the more you hear them, the more you appreciate their brilliance, especially Gord Downey, the lead singer. He's a great lyric writer and got a really original vocal style. He's a true original, that guy. So I think their music, largely as a result of his charisma, is a very fine example of Canadian rock.
Okay. How about Neil Young?
Neil Young is the grandfather. I mean, the guy is awesome. To me, he is one of the most influential people in the history of rock, period, from his days in the Buffalo Springfield right through Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, and the stuff he keeps doing on his own. I mean, he just keeps going, and he keeps reaching. He crosses generation to generation, and he's a true artist, and I have great respect for him.
How about Joni, another true artist?
Joni Mitchell was very influential to me when I was growing up. Her Blue album, For the Roses, those albums I listened to over and over and over again. And her songwriting style has always stayed with me. And, you know, if I had to list the great songwriters of the 70s and possibly into the 80s, she would definitely be on the top 5. You know, her and Paul Simon, two great songwriters. That came out of obviously folk music, but very important, I think.
How about the Guess Who?
Well, Burton Cummings, I love his voice. He's a great singer, still is a great singer, and had a very unique voice. And I think a lot of the success of the Guess Who came of his presence and his vocal.
And they just reunited to like do this amazing like sold out tour in Canada. I
Mhm.
hope they come here. I always loved. I mean, I grew up with hearing all those singles on the radio too.
Yeah.
They'd be a fun band to see.